Part 1. The fortress we build around the heart. There's a moment we don't talk about enough, the moment someone moves too close, says something too kind, loves us too well, and we feel the need to retreat. Not because they did anything wrong, but because closeness feels like danger. You know this moment. We all do. It's not loud. It's quiet, subtle, a sudden gut feeling, a pullback, a wall rising inside us without permission. And then we create distance, not because we don't care, but because caring feels like a trap we swore we'd never fall into again. This is where our journey begins, inside the mind of someone who pushes love away, yet longs for it with every fiber of their being. If you've ever sabotaged a good relationship, ghosted someone after a vulnerable moment, or felt suffocated by affection, even when part of you craved it, this isn't your flaw. It's your programming. It's not that you're incapable of love. It's that somewhere in your past, love became tangled with fear. And now, every time it shows up, your nervous system confuses it with pain. That's not a personality defect. That's avoidant attachment. And to understand it, we must go back to the beginning, before we had language to explain what we felt, before we had logic to make sense of our isolation. Avoidant attachment isn't born from disinterest. It's born from disappointment. Often, deeply emotional children are raised in environments where emotional needs are unmet, invalidated, or even punished. These children learn quickly: vulnerability equals rejection. Expression equals danger. So they adapt. They become independent, self-reliant, emotionally armored, and the world applauds them for it. But inside, they feel profoundly unseen. As philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre once said, if you're lonely when you're alone, you're in bad company. And yet, for avoidance, solitude is often the only place that feels safe. The tragedy is that avoidantly attached people are not cold. They are frozen. Their emotional body is in a kind of stasis, stuck in a time when opening up led to pain. And so they push people away, not because they don't love them, but because they don't know how to feel safe loving them. This is something most people don't understand. Avoidant types aren't heartless. They're wounded. And the wound is invisible, buried beneath decades of strength, competence, and emotional distance. Let me ask you something piercing. What did you have to shut down in yourself to be loved by those who couldn't meet you emotionally? What part of your soul did you silence to keep the peace? And how much of that silence still lives inside you? At around the 3-minute mark of this journey, we encounter our first re-engagement moment. Imagine a child sitting in their room after being told, once again, stop crying. Toughen up. Don't be so dramatic. They look around and realize no one is coming. No one understands. And so they make a decision, not out loud, but in their nervous system: I will never need anyone again. That's the moment the walls begin to rise. That's when love becomes a risk, not a refuge.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
As we grow, we carry this wound into our relationships. We become the ones who say we're not looking for anything serious. We leave before they can leave us. We intellectualize our emotions. We avoid eye contact during conflict. We crave connection but dread dependency. And the most tragic part, we often attract people with anxious attachment, those who cling harder as we pull away. This creates a toxic dance of pursuit and withdrawal, closeness and escape. And unless we become conscious of this pattern, we will relive it over and over. Philosopher Søren Kierkegaard said, "Anxiety is the dizziness of freedom." And for the avoidant, freedom is both a comfort and a curse. We long to be free from enmeshment, from suffocation, from emotional chaos. But in our pursuit of freedom, we often imprison ourselves in loneliness. We forget that freedom without intimacy is isolation, that strength without vulnerability is empty, that independence without connection is a beautifully decorated cage. Let's look at the inner world of the avoidant for a moment. There's a voice that says, "Don't rely on anyone. Don't show weakness. Don't get too comfortable." That voice isn't the enemy. It's the protector. It was born to keep you safe. But what kept you safe as a child might now be keeping you stuck as an adult. And if we never question that voice, we'll live our entire lives in emotional exile, close enough to feel the warmth of others, but never enough to let it in. Here's something most people won't tell you. Healing avoidant attachment doesn't begin with others. It begins with you. It begins with noticing the moment you want to shut down and choosing, gently, to stay open for just one breath longer. It begins with naming your fear not as something to be ashamed of, but as something to befriend. Because avoidance is not about rejecting others. It's about rejecting the parts of ourselves that we were told were unlovable. Let me ask you another soul-level question. What would it feel like to be fully seen and still be loved? Not for your accomplishments, not for your independence, but for your being, for your presence, for your messy, emotional, vulnerable, beautifully human heart. Avoidant attachment is not a life sentence. It's a map that leads us through our fears, through our protective strategies, through the quiet grief of unlived intimacy. And on the other side is not just connection with others, but connection with the parts of ourselves we had to abandon in order to survive. But before we reach that place, we must confront the intensity, the confrontation of the self. The realization that we have been both the prisoner and the warden. That the walls we built to keep pain out also kept love out. And that maybe, just maybe, it's time to open the gate. Part 2. The emotional desert beneath the mask. There's a moment of terrifying clarity that comes when you realize what you thought was strength was actually fear in disguise. The confidence, the emotional independence, the "I don't need anyone" mindset, all of it was a mask. A brilliant, convincing mask. But beneath it lies a desert, dry, vast, and silent. A place where emotions go to be buried, not felt. This is the internal landscape of the avoidantly attached, a world of logic without warmth, action without feeling, connection without vulnerability. But how did this desert form? To understand it, we must revisit the emotional ecology of your earliest environment. Avoidant attachment is not born in chaos, it is born in emotional scarcity. The avoidant child often grows up in homes where emotions are dismissed, minimized, or outright punished. Their caregivers may have provided food, shelter, and even praise, but not emotional attunement. Not presence, not safety and softness. And so the child learns to adapt, to disconnect, to rely on themselves. This is the birth of the emotional self-sufficiency myth, the belief that needing others is weak, that vulnerability is a liability, that closeness will only lead to disappointment. And the tragedy is, as this belief hardens into identity, we lose access to our own emotional world. We intellectualize everything. We analyze instead of feel. We explain instead of express. And eventually, we don't even know what we feel anymore. We just know we don't want them to come closer. As philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "Invisible threads are the strongest ties." And yet, for those with avoidant attachment, those threads feel like chains. When someone gets too close, we feel trapped not because they're unsafe, but because we've equated closeness with loss of control. We fear engulfment. We fear that if we let someone all the way in, we'll lose ourselves. But here's the paradox. By keeping others out, we've already lost a part of ourselves. Let me ask you this. What part of you had to die so that you could be loved by someone who feared your emotions? What dreams, desires, or emotional truths did you bury to avoid being too much, too intense, too needy? And how much longer are you willing to live in that emotional exile? Around the 3-minute mark, we reach our next re-engagement moment, a mystical, almost cinematic flashback. You're in a relationship. Someone tells you, "I love you." And instead of feeling warmth, you feel panic. Your heart constricts. You pull away. You suddenly remember errands, work, anything to escape the weight of that intimacy. You don't understand why, but your body does. It remembers being vulnerable and being met with silence. So now, love feels like danger. This is the body's truth. The nervous system doesn't lie. It remembers what the mind tries to forget. This is why avoidant attachment is not just psychological, it's somatic. It lives in your breath, your posture, your eyes. You look away when things get real. You freeze when someone reaches out. You feel safest in control, but control is not connection. And here lies the conflict. We want love, but we fear the exposure it demands. We crave intimacy, but resist the vulnerability it requires. We want to be held, but flinch when someone reaches for us. This is not hypocrisy. It's trauma. And trauma is not what happens to us. It's what happens inside us when we face emotional starvation. As Gabor Mate says, trauma is not the event itself, but the disconnection that happens within. So what do? We begin where we are, with awareness, with honesty, with the radical decision to stop running from ourselves. Healing avoidant attachment is not about becoming someone new. It's about unbecoming the false self we created to survive. It's about reintroducing ourselves to the parts we left behind. The part that felt deeply. The part that cried easily. The part that just wanted to be held. Let's talk about relationships. Because avoidantly attached people often attract anxious partners. Why? Because anxious types chase intimacy and avoidants run from it. This creates a push-pull dynamic that feels familiar, even addictive. The anxious partner says, "I need more." The avoidant hears, "You're not enough." The more the anxious pursues, the more the avoidant retreats. This isn't love. It's reenactment, a repetition of childhood wounds. So how do we break the cycle? First, we must pause, observe. Notice the moment we want to pull away, not with judgment, but with curiosity. Ask ourselves, what am I feeling right now? Often the answer is fear. Fear of dependence. Fear of being smothered. Fear of letting go of the illusion of control. And when we name the fear, we disarm it. It no longer drives the ship from the shadows. Philosopher Alan Watts said, trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth. And yet, that's what we try to do when we avoid connection. We try to define our worth in isolation. But we are relational beings. We cannot fully know ourselves without being seen, without being mirrored, without being met. And so, the avoidant must make peace with the terrifying truth: we need others. Let me ask you something deep and disruptive. What if your independence is a trauma response, not a personality trait? What if the thing you're most proud of, your self-reliance, your detachment, is actually a shield you built to survive? And what if that shield is now keeping you from the very thing you need most? This is not about blame. It's about awakening. Awakening to the cost of your armor. Awakening to the possibility of something more. But awakening is not gentle. It is a shattering, a dismantling, a sacred unraveling. You will feel raw, exposed, uncertain. But that's how truth feels at first, like a wound before it becomes a doorway. And on the other side of that doorway is intimacy, not the kind that consumes you, but the kind that holds you. The kind that says, you don't have to perform here. You don't have to disappear to be loved. And that kind of intimacy is possible, but only if you stop confusing safety with distance. Let's get practical. Start small. When someone reaches out, pause before you retreat. Breathe. Stay in the moment 1 second longer than you did yesterday. Practice naming your feelings, not to explain them, but to honor them. Speak your fear, not to be fixed, but to be witnessed. This is how the avoidant begins to rewire their nervous system from fear to openness, from defense to connection. You are not broken. You are not incapable of love. You are simply unpracticed in receiving it. But that can change. Neuroplasticity is real. Healing is possible. And it starts with a decision. I will no longer push away the very thing I long for. Let me close this part with a question that might just open your heart. What would your life look like if you let yourself be loved without running from it? Not perfectly, not fearlessly, but honestly. Gently. One breath, one choice, one connection at a time. Part 3. The return to intimacy and the rebirth of the self. There comes a point on this journey where we stop asking, why do I push people away? And begin asking, what would it take to finally let someone in? This shift is not just about relationships, it's about the soul. Because avoidant attachment isn't merely a psychological pattern. It's a fracture in the relationship we have with our own vulnerability. And the work of healing is not about becoming more attached, it's about becoming more integrated. It's about restoring the connection between our longing and our fear, our strength and our softness, our mind and our body. And so we enter the final phase of this journey, the sacred return, in the return to intimacy. Not the kind we see in movies, the kind that is messy, imperfect, human. The kind that requires us to confront the parts of ourselves we've kept hidden for decades. The philosopher Martin Buber once wrote, "All real living is meeting." To live fully means to meet not just others, but ourselves. And for the avoidantly attached, this is the most radical act of all, to meet yourself in your rawness and not turn away. Let's be honest. Letting love in feels like a death, in the death of the persona, the death of control, the death of the belief that I am fine on my own. But death is not the end. It is transformation. To let someone in is to let the old self die, the self that had to be strong, distant, untouchable. And in its place, a new self is born, one that is strong and soft, guarded and open, independent and intimately connected. But this rebirth doesn't happen all at once. It happens in micro moments of courage, moments when you say, "I'm scared," instead of disappearing. When you stay in the conversation instead of shutting down. When you allow yourself to be held, even when your body tenses with resistance. These are not small victories. These are revolutions. Because every time you choose openness over avoidance, you are rewriting the story of your nervous system. Let me ask you something deep, maybe even uncomfortable. If you didn't have to be strong all the time, who would you let yourself become? What emotions would you finally allow yourself to feel? What relationships would you finally allow yourself to receive? And what kind of peace might you feel, not from being alone, but from finally being seen? At around the 6-minute mark of this story, we reach our second re-engagement moment, an emotional awakening. You're in a quiet room. Someone you love is looking at you with softness. They're not trying to fix you. They're not asking you to change. They're just there. And for the first time, you don't look away. You let the moment land. You let the warmth in. And something in you whispers, maybe I don't have to run anymore. This is the moment avoidant types rarely speak of, the moment they realize love didn't hurt them. The absence of love did. And suddenly, the pattern becomes clear. The retreat. The shutdown. The ghosting. It wasn't about the other person. It was about the old wound flaring up. The wound that said, when they know the real you, they'll leave. But now you're beginning to see, the real you is not a burden. The real you is the doorway to connection. Let's talk now about the role of self-compassion. Because healing avoidance is not about forcing yourself into discomfort. It's about reparenting yourself through it. When you feel the urge to push someone away, ask yourself, what am I protecting right now? What am I afraid they'll see? And then, instead of shaming that fear, offer it understanding. Speak to yourself the way a loving parent would. It's okay to feel afraid. It's okay to not have all the answers. You are still safe. Philosopher Lao Tzu said, being deeply loved by someone gives you strength, while loving someone deeply gives you courage. And for the avoidant, both are needed. Strength to receive love, courage to give it. We often think of love as a risk, but for the avoidant, love is a practice of choosing presence over protection, a practice of staying when every cell says run. This brings us to the final stage of healing, integration. Integration is not perfection. It's not the erasure of fear. It's the ability to stay conscious in the presence of fear, and to know that you are afraid, but still choose connection. To know that your instinct is to shut down, but still say, tell me more. This is emotional maturity. This is secure attachment. Not because the fear is gone, but because you're no longer ruled by it. Let me ask you one last question, the kind that doesn't need an answer today, but must be lived every day forward. What kind of love would you give and receive if you trusted that you wouldn't lose yourself in it? What kind of life would open up if connection no longer felt like a trap but a gift? What kind of self would emerge if you stopped hiding behind strength and started living from wholeness? You are not your attachment style. You are not your patterns. You are not the walls you built to survive. You are the one who is capable of healing them. You are the one who can hold hands with fear and still walk toward love. You are the one who can learn to say, "I need you," and not feel ashamed. And maybe the most important truth of all, you are not too far gone. You're not too distant. You're not too cold. You are human. And your humanity, your longing, your hesitation, your desire to be free and connected is not a contradiction. It's what makes your love so rare, so real, so worth waiting for. Let us leave you with this. The psychology of pushing people away is not a pathology. It's a history. But history can be rewritten. And you, right now, are holding the pen.